think thank you, Jersey, and Brandon. Thank you, everybody, for coming. My name is Steve Hudson, and today I'm going to show you what's been my main hobby for the last 4 or 5 years, which is constructing this system of ideograms that I call neoideograms for English. Can you hear okay? Okay. So neo means new, but what really is an ideogram? Technically, an ideogram is a written symbol that represents an idea or object directly. But I use the term loosely. Some of mine are logograms, just representing words. So, mine are neoideograms. I call them neoideograms. What would be paleo or old ideograms? The two most prominent examples are Chinese characters and ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics. Chinese characters have been around for thousands of years, and they're filled with beauty and intelligence, and they work very effectively for the people in China and Japan who use them, and other countries. Though they can be arcane, by which I mean they have obscure roots in the past, so it can be hard to understand, and they can be pretty complicated. Ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics are artistically very awesome, but they're extremely old and defunct. They're not used anymore, and not applicable to the modern world. So here's what I've come up with, what I call neoideograms. I've tried to make them modern in the sense of using contemporary images and contemporary understandings, and to make them efficient. I'll read what I have here for you. It says, do what you can to create better ways of thinking clearly. Explore and observe the results of your effort. I guess I'll never stop using and developing this script. It is interesting and a lot of fun. So, what is the story of my having come to develop this? Where did I get the idea and the motivation? I have to give some credit to Alfred Korzybski. I read some of his book, Science and Sanity, I think when I was in my high school years, and he's big on maps. And he's famous for saying that the map is not the territory. He thinks that language is a map and words are maps, and it's better if maps have a structural similarity to their territory. So I think that's one place I got the idea that it's really the way to go to represent ideas graphically. There's his book, Science and Sanity. It's a big book, 800 pages or so, so I didn't read it all. Then, in my late 20s, I spent about 3.5 years in Japan teaching English at a couple of conversation schools. It was a great experience. I loved it. I loved the Japanese language. I learned Japanese to an intermediate level. I became familiar with the Chinese characters and learned to appreciate them. One of my Japanese friends told me about the Chinese characters, which they call kanji in Japanese, that he said in Japanese, kanji wa kanji ga aru, which means kanji have feeling. And I think what he meant was they have an artistic and semantic impact that our way of writing doesn't have. They bring something else to the table. There's more to it. And I really agree with that. I really respect them. And from my observation, of how people use them in Japan, I became convinced that they actually help people think, because they're a graphic reference. I remember seeing some engineers talking before one of my classes, and they were writing on a whiteboard. And I could tell they were referring to them, and it helped them think. So there's a power there. So, fast forward quite a few years. 4 or 5 years ago, I was reviewing my Chinese characters in this book, which I'd gone through a couple of times, and for some reason, this time that I went through it, I became kind of annoyed at how nonsensical some of them are, or seem to be, in terms of their constituent parts adding up to the meaning. For instance, the one right down there in the bottom, it's probably pretty hard to see, but the parts are big chicken and a bit of, and the meaning is to rob. That's kind of obscure, kind of hard to see how that could add up to that meaning. Here are a few other examples. And this part over here is a ditch, and this is an insect. And the meaning is to melt. And this is mine over here. This is ice and a drop of water. Much more pictorial. This one, I like it. It feels like leaf to me, but it is fairly complex. The top part's plant, this is world, and this is a tree. That's leaf, but I just have a simple picture for leaf. And it's a lot faster to write and easier to understand, easier to learn. Here's a pretty complex one. The parts are flour, pretty, dirty, and cooking fire, according to that book. And the meaning is recommend. That's pretty obscure. Mine this is what I have for say, this is good, and this is which in Latin means again. So you're saying again that something is good. You're recommending it. So that's the general idea. Okay, so as I said, I was really convinced that ideograms empower thought. They're really good things. They work well. But I was annoyed at these Chinese characters, and I got the idea. What if I tried to make them for English and brought the benefit of ideograms to English and used contemporary images from everyday life, not obscure images from long ago, and tried to make them efficient so they're quick to learn, easy to recognize, that sort of thing. So I began playing around with it. A lot of it was when my slow old computer was booting up. I doodled with it, and I became serious about it. I liked my results a lot. I enjoyed it, and I just couldn't stop. So after 4 or 5 years, I'm not sure exactly when I started, I have a pretty full system that covers, that's my diary. As a matter of fact, if people like to pass it around, they can look at it, and the real thing. Actually, it's my second diary that I have. I filled one up already. So I have a pretty full system that I use for my diary. I use it for notes in margins of books, and I kind of have a head full, but I use it for thinking sometimes. This is and I have a dictionary here. It's about the 10th edition of it that covers about 6,000 words. And I have a website I've had for about a year. I've had about 2,000 views, a lot of them recently. Interestingly, a couple of weeks ago, some people from an artificial intelligence computer lab in Paris looked at it, made about over 200 views of it, then ordered a book. So I'm not sure what their interest is, but they're interested. And I've got a couple of people who've ordered books and are working on learning. So I call them IDs for short, because neoideogram is pretty long and cumbersome, IDs. Why am I doing it? What do I get out of it? For me, they've been very educational. I illustrate Latin and Greek roots with them, and I've read that of English words of 2 or more syllables, over 90% are from Latin and Greek. So, and most people who don't know it very well, who don't study Latin, since people don't study Latin and Greek anymore, maybe a majority of the syllables that are coming out of their mouths and into their eyes and ears, they don't really know very well. So it helps as a tool to learn the language better. It is a new mental tool. It helps me think anyway, a new tool for your mental toolbox. And it changes your brain. Language is such a central part of our beings that making it graphic, it's just bound to change it quite a bit. And I have a lot of fun. Of course, I've had to do a lot of creating to do this, and the creation process is a lot of fun. I get a lot out of it. There's my brain before I did this, and this is my brain now. I've got all these images. Of course, I have the old ones there still. But the really significant thing, I think, is that images like this stick in your mind better. That's why memory experts use pictures. They're stickier. They stick in your memory better. And I think they also make more connections among one another. So my experience is that it enriches the connections in my linguistic mind. It's pretty enriching. I'll just read some of these off to you in case you're curious. Sit, meet, sound, say, part, whole, in, sleep, on, money, fall, run, eat, house. So my aim when I started doing this, my main overarching aim was efficiency, because there's so many words in English and I didn't want to have to make 10,000 ideograms. I didn't want to have to try to make an ideogram for every finely nuanced literary word. It would just be too hard. So I thought, well, I've got to try to cut the workload down, make them efficient. So I had the idea of making them pictorial as much as possible, using signs and symbols that are already familiar to people. So I use the Pac-Man for eat. I think it's pretty familiar. I use what I call indicators, which are signs or symbols that I can put a mark by in some place, usually to show the degree of some quality. And like I said, I illustrate Latin and Greek roots. Here's an example of how I try to be pictorial. Here's my ideogram for strong, which I get from the image of a strong arm. So that's pretty simple, strong. And then this down here is what I call the graphic opposite of strong, weak. So pretty simple. This is a very pictorial little ideogram I made for study. It's a person sitting at a desk or table with a lamp. I have other ideograms for study, but I like this one because it's so pictorial. It has a nice feeling of study. And surprisingly, I found that after writing this a few times, it really doesn't take me any longer to write than the word does. I could write it pretty quickly, so it's fun. And I decided to go ahead and take a small number of ideograms from Chinese or kanji that I liked, just because I was familiar with them, and I figured why completely reinvent the wheel. I modified some of them a little bit, like this is correct. I changed it to that, just to simplify it. Made that an oval instead of a rectangle.
Okay, that one in Chinese is a worker.
Pardon me?
The one you changed,
yes.
actually itself is a word.
Yes, it is. You're right. That is confusing, isn't it? For someone who knows the characters. Thank you. I can change it. So yeah, actually I kind of like the original. So a person could just go ahead and use that. Okay, I researched hieroglyphics and used a small number of them that I liked. I took some from symbolic logic and the computer field. I used some of my own notation that I started using in high school a little bit. It was not very many symbols, just a little bit of a shorthand. And here's an example of what I call indicators. This is my temperature indicator, which is supposed to look like a thermometer. So I put a dot high on the right for hot and low on the right for cold. My distance indicator, near, far. Some other indicators. I use this for color, white, black. This is red, and the center part is supposed to be a drop of blood. For green, I have a leaf in the center. For blue, I have the Egyptian hieroglyph for sky. House part, floor, wall, ceiling. So I use a small square for position, in, on, under, top, etc. I started out with something like this, the idea of using something like this for a good-bad indicator, but I trashed it, decided to split it in two. So this is what I use for good, this is what I use for bad. I use a dot at the very top to show the superlative. So that would be best and the opposite, etc. And as I said, I illustrate Latin and Greek, and the convention I decided on was to put a dot low on the left for Latin, high on the left for Greek. Here's ordinary English under. In Latin, there's the dot low on the left showing Latin. It's sub. In Greek, it's hypo, dot high on the left. There's ordinary English work. In Latin, it's labor or oper. And in Greek, erg. Here are a couple of examples. Co is together or with. Labor, so that's collaborate. In Greek, together with is syn, and erg, so that's synergy. This right here is skin. The bottom part is body, and the line up on the top shows what's on the surface of the body. So that's skin. In Latin, it's cute. So this is subcutaneous. And using the same characters, this one, Greek, is hypodermic, because derm is skin in Greek. Yes?
You're using syllables, in effect, to combine and make a bigger word in this case, right?
Yeah.
So you use spaces then?
Well, I go ahead and put a dot if it's a polysyllabic word that is all Latin. I put a dot at the beginning of the word.
So subcutaneous would have a dot at the end to show end of concatenation of syllables?
No, I think it's pretty obvious when the words end, the way I've been doing it.
If I just read subcutaneous in a sentence, I'd say sub, well, that's not a word, it must be...
Yeah, well, the dot would show you that it's Latin on the lower left.
I'm saying, am I reading a syllable or am I reading a word?
Okay.
Skin is a word all by itself.
Mm-hmm.
But in this case, it's part of a word, subcutaneous.
Yeah, I've always been able to tell from context because I've been writing it. I think other people would be able to tell from context. And here's an example of how doing this has kind of enriched my understanding. The English word subtle is from the Latin sub, under, and tel, web. So here's a web that I've simplified right here. So sub, tel, subtle. And I had some trouble for quite a while reconciling these parts of the word to the actual meaning now, until I decided, well, maybe what the Romans meant was that it's finer than a spider's web, very fine. And I don't know if that's true. That's what how I've come to think about it. So it's kind of enriched my understanding of the word. It's kind of typical. I've learned a lot more about a lot of words that have enriched, or I feel like I have enriched understandings. I don't always use the Latin and Greek. For instance, for the word interesting, the Latin part would be between or among, and esse, to be. And that could be open to the same criticism they had for some Chinese characters. It doesn't make much sense. It's arcane, and it's hard to see how esse means interesting. So I use something different. I use this for to think. It's a brain. That's what you do with your brain. One of the things to think. And the idea is that it raises your thinking and sustains it. So, and this is ing here. For develop, I use the delta triangle for change and an arrow going up. For create, I use the center dot of I. This is what I use for the pronoun I. My idea is that when you create something, it's coming from your inner self, coming out. For conversation in Latin, this would be with versus turn, with turning. And I suppose it's give and take a conversation. But I use, this is what I have for say, kind of a cartoonish mouth from the side. I double it for talk, and then for conversation I have the talk coming from both sides. Here are some words that I don't use the Latin for. I could, but the interesting thing I think is that I ended up with these words, result, effect, and influence, are similar in meaning, and so I end up with ideograms that look similar. So there's, it makes sense to me anyway. Just to show you some of the challenges I had and how I solved them to do this. This is what I did for the pronouns. You has to at the top, which makes sense because the second person you is the person spoken to. He and she have different haircuts. I've got this they is for things, and that's they for people. For the possessive, I add a dot, which means of. So of me would be my, of him, his, etc. For tenses, the main thing I use is my time indicator. It's my time indicator. Use the left part of it for past. So there's sit, and with that above it, it's sat. Use the right part to show the future, the right side. And see, will see. And I put a dot in for the past participle, thought, done. Which happens to be the favorite saying of, or was the favorite saying of the German poet Goethe, so that could be in German, gedacht, getan. I ended up using 4 different things for person. This simple one from Chinese characters is very easy, fast to write. The stick figure is very versatile. I can make it sit and bow, other things. This one is from hieroglyphics. It's not exactly the same as the hieroglyph, but it's similar. Though this one, rejoice, is very, very similar to the hieroglyph for rejoice. The main thing I use it for is the bottom part for body. I use this one because I put things in the center to show inner qualities. This is effort. Fort is strong in Latin. And this arrow going out is the F part. F means out. X. So we have the strength coming out. Effort. Here are a bunch of ids, as I call them, using this person. Decided that when you do something, something's projecting from a person, so I just have an arrow coming off a person. I modified it for act. For work, I cheated. I like to cheat as part of efficiency, I think. If you don't cheat, you're not trying hard enough. And use the K at the end of work in it. To me, I'm kind of happy with that. It looks nice and solid, like work to me. Then for serve, I have is a combination of bow and work. It's working with a bow. Serve. Just go through a few others here. Here's drive. It's a person with a stick driving along an animal. I kind of like what I came up with for tired. It looks pretty tired. I think you'll agree. Okay, and sometimes I'll combine a word origin element with other elements. For instance, the word obvious is from Latin ob, on, and via, road. I hope that looks like a road to you. It's supposed to be a road disappearing in the horizon. And the idea is that if something's obvious, it's right there on the road, easy to see. So I've got a seeing eye at the top, and I use X for a thing. And so the seeing eye is seeing something that's right there on the road, quite obvious. For this word fragile, I've combined two. This is what I have for break, which is rupt or frag or frac in Latin. And this is my ideogram for easy. It's a person going downhill. And a person going uphill is what I use for hard or difficult. So I've combined the two, easy to break, fragile. This is consider. Sitter is Latin for star. And this is to think, so it's shows it's the word think that has sitter in it. And it's from when people used astrology, they would consult the stars when they thought something over. Consider. This is principle. The prince part means first in Latin. So I've got a series of 3 dots, and the triangle over the first one makes it first. And this part here is rule. So it's the first rule, the principle. In coincidence, co is together, sid is to fall. This is a container. I've got 2 things falling into the container together. They're coinciding, falling together. Here's some more kind of typical ones. I use this for busy. It's a lot of doing a lot. This is complexion. I've got my color indicator and a face in the center, the color of someone's face. Or I could have skin here, the color of someone's skin. This is the interview. This is view at the top, 2 people sitting facing each other, interview. This is cool. I showed you the temperature indicator before, the wavy line kind of down low. This is abundant. It has the Latin word unda in it, wave, like undulate. And it's a container that's very full with a wave, abundant. This one is ready. The left part is order, and the right part is my beginning and end indicator. I used a neoideogram where for neo, new, I had a circle near the beginning. So it's in order at the beginning, ready. This one is symmetrical. This by itself is measure, which is meter in Greek. So I decided to actually make it symmetrical. And for asymmetrical, I make the right one much smaller. This is what I have, or one of them that I use for cheat. It's going around what is correct. Or I could have rule there, going around rules, or maybe good, going around what is good. That's tired, which you saw before. I use this for mistake. This is wrong down here. The X is a thing. It's a wrong thing. This is strange. When I use the bell curve for chance, if I put something near the center, that's something that's happening often, and something over on the side is something that happens infrequently. So, and the black triangle is supposed to be kind of somehow heavier and more ominous than an unfilled-in triangle. This is my 3D space indicator. And this is room. If I put a circle around it, it would be space. Here's some a little bit more advanced, involved ones. This is what I use for logic. Think, order, and weigh. The way of orderly thinking. This is what I use for abstract. I use in general. There's its opposite, specific. At the top here, and I actually used Alfred Korzybski's model for abstraction. In his book, he has what he calls a structural differential, which is a 3D model of the abstraction process. And one feature of that is strings hanging down that show whenever you abstract, you leave things out. You leave things untied up. You leave out details. And that's just what I came up with. Of course, other people could come up with something better, I'm sure. One thing I came up with for metaphor. I have that for simple, that for complex, this for like. So it's a likening of something complex to something simple, more simple or more familiar. So you can see I have fun creating these things. Okay, here are some simple id sentences. Every day I get up, eat breakfast, and go to work. There's the sun over the surface of the earth. In get up, I've got, this is a bed, and there's a person, you can see it's pretty pictorial. Get up. Every day I get up, eat, that's just the Pac-Man, very familiar. And this is breakfast. If I put the Pac-Man over on the other side, it'd be dinner. Tell her that I will do it after I finish helping my dad. For tell, I have say and ear. That's after, it's another time indicator I have, looks like a clock. Finish uses my beginning and end indicator. Help is the Chinese character for power, and adding power, helping. Ids can be used for notes and for a diary. Use the Chinese character for can here. I have other things I use for can, that's one of them. I cheat for 4, use the F. Diary, the top part's supposed to be a lid, which indicates privacy, secrecy, keeping something under a lid. There's day, there's book. I'm sorry, it's not written very clearly. Day, which you saw there, and book. Secret, day, book, diary. And this is, if I built a house, first I would lay the foundation, then add the walls and the roof. Okay, that's if, and I use if over a verb for the conditional. So that could be would build, or in this case, built. That's structure, and with the upward arrow by structure, it's build. So if I built. We already saw first, and that's would lay. Would lay the foundation, then add the walls and the roof. So it works very well for ordinary language, or it seems to me like it does. Okay, here's another little example. This is from the beginning of the Star Trek TV show from the 70s. Space, the final frontier. These are the voyages of the Starship Enterprise. Its 5-year mission to explore strange new worlds, to seek out new life and new civilizations, to boldly go where no one has gone before. There's space, it's my 3D indicator with a circle around it for space. Frontier has a Latin word for forehead in it, like confront does too. So that's supposed to be an eye right there and the top of the person's head. And the dot shows it's the forehead. And the big box I use for country and things like that. It's the border of it, so frontier. These is the plural of this. Voyage has the Latin via, road in it, and I use this for to go, an indicator of travel. Enterprise from the French entreprise, to enter and take. Mission is from the Latin miss, to send. World, I have Earth in the center, and this is my globality indicator. I use it for concepts that have the idea of something global in it. So that's what I have for world. Seek is a search and go. For life, I use the Egyptian Ankh, which was life in hieroglyphics. Civilization of people and correct. So, So some of the possibilities for this, I have applied it to other languages on my website. I've transcribed some German into it, and I have the idea, I haven't had it confirmed yet, that if someone did this in German, say if someone knew these in English, then they looked at some German written in these, they'd be able to understand 80 or 90% of it, because the languages are pretty close, and it's so pictorial. So it could have some potential for international communication. I think it could have some potential for kids. They might like it as just a fun secret language, and it would strengthen their imaginations. And of course, I haven't found out yet, but kids might be able to learn something like this more quick at an earlier age and more easily than learning the alphabet. For older people, it's a language, a pictorial and symbolic language within English, and it's pretty simple. So I imagine that it might really stimulate people's imaginations and give them a new lease on language. And I think it has for me. I'm an older person, so. And it could be good for special needs people. I don't know. You know, there's another language, something like this, out there that's been around for a long time, bliss symbols, and they use it for special needs people. And I'd just like to say that probably I've spent many thousands of hours using these and transcribing. I've transcribed a lot, not whole books, but I spent a lot of time transcribing. And it's affected my mind quite a bit. I've found that I have much more of a tendency to think in clear diagrams. Whenever I'm reading complex material or just sitting in my car going down the street, if I'm thinking about something, images pop into mind much more readily than they used to. And since I can use these ideograms as components for these images, it helps. I think it helps me think. This, for instance, I was reading a Korzybski biography not long ago, and he was talking about how the absolute objectivity is a myth. So that the subject is always involved. So and this kind of popped into my mind just to kind of nail that idea down. This is I, the subject, and that's what I have for an object. And this kind of illustrates the idea that they can't be separated. It's always a field. And when you observe, you affect the object, and the object affects you. So I could give a bunch of examples of that, but they come up in my mind all the time. It has actually changed my mind. Thank you. Any questions? Yes?